That's perfect. Yes, of course. Thank you for the nice introduction, Rachel, and I'm very happy to be here again. And thank you all for joining me. And I will try to be very quick in a talk because I have a very long, of course, Dutch portraiture of the 17th century is a huge topic. So I will concise myself to the Dutch Republic, and maybe another time I can talk about Flanders. But let's start. And this is a portrait in the beginning of a lady by Jan van Ravenstein, and I will come back on this painter later on. The Dutch Republic was an enormous success economically, and whereas the economic power in other European countries was concentrated with the nobility and landed gentry, in the Dutch Republic, with its successful economy, the growing elite of merchants, city magistrates, and entrepreneurs, the so-called regents, became very powerful. The economical wealth allowed them to position themselves in high functions of local authority institutions, thus diminishing the power of the court and nobility. And we have the birth of a bourgeois society, which was really something special. The new wealth and confidence quickly resulted in the habit of commissioning portraits. The production became very high. Generally, portraits were commissioned to commemorate a certain moment, such as marriage, birth of a child, or to show persons in function. Not only individual portraits, but also group portraits, such as militia portraits or portraits of governors of almshouses or an orphanage. Another category are the portraits of long deceased ancestors of whom no pictures were known, so the likeness was not very much often, or a posthumous portrait of a child. Here I see two very remarkable portraits of swaddled children, which was a habit at that time to do that. And here is one of the portraits that I found very moving. It's probably the family of Jan Gerritson Pan. And when they were in the beginning of their 30s, they already had 9 dead children and 2 living children. Can you imagine? But this is really a special portrait to me, and I think for many. Let's see. Well, of course, there are other portraits, such as portraits historiques, group portraits, etc. In portrait historique, for example, sitters were depicted as mythological figures or biblical figures. The so-called tronies are not taken into account in my talk. As portraits together with landscapes were the most produced genres at the time, they were not very well high in the hierarchy of art at that time. That was more for history paintings. In the 15th and 16th century, there was no political and cultural division, but after 1500, there was a significant increase in the portraiture production and also in civil society. In the first decades of the 1500s, there were portraitists in various cities, such as Amsterdam, Leiden, Middelburg, and there was a significant development in Friesland. In 1529, you see the portrait here, or part of it, the middle center panel of a militia group portrait. This is the first one. And you see it's a rather static composition, but the hands are quite interesting and they make it much more lively. It's painted by Dirk Jacobs, and it was the start of a real portrait militia group painting tradition. Other early portraitists of the time are Jan van Schorel, Maarten van Heemskerk, working in Haarlem predominantly, and Adriaan van Cronenberg, who worked mainly in Friesland and Groningen. And now, in the beginning of the 80 Years' War with Spain, there was a seizure in the development and a reduction in the production of portraits, not in the least because commission from the church largely stopped because of, well, of course, the Protestantism and because of the political unstable period. Moreover, 3 of the most prolific artists, I just mentioned them, died. But people like new artists like Isaac van Zwanenburg, who trained in Antwerpen, worked in Leiden and continued actually a production flow in that city. From 1580 on, a portrait culture developed that would result in a golden age for portraiture in the Netherlands. And as said, the merchant, magistrate, and entrepreneur emerged and became very powerful. Again, the militia portrait that had become very popular in the 16th century until the dissolution of the militia guilds, of the Amsterdam militia guilds in 1567, regained popularity when in 1578 a new city government was formed and militia guilds were founded again. And it was resulted in a large increase in group portrait commissions. I really like this particular portrait because although it's a little, how do you say that, naive, it's very funny, very interesting. It shows St. Joris in the back, and of course the axe. In case somebody would be really nasty, bam, they would really go for it. So it's a real warning, and I think it's just really wonderful. Let's say when I go to the next slide, another militia portrait group painting. Let's see, I have to, as many painters, predominantly, did not sign their work in the beginning. It's very difficult sometimes to define who painted what. However, significant research had made it clear that nearly every town in the northern provinces had one or more portraitists, but most of them were situated in Amsterdam. In the late 16th centuries, the brothers Peter and Aert Peters became very important. See, for example, the 6 wardens of the Drapers Guild. See here, and again you see that over a period of about 70 years the situation, or at least the composition, is rather a little bit similar as the earlier one that I showed, again with the lively hands, but you see there is more, there is already a little bit more variety, and it's very well painted. I said it. So I would also like to show 2 other portraits by a painter from Enkhuizen, Nicolaes. He painted, for example, these 2 portraits of the father and a son and a mother and a daughter, and I think it's just absolutely stunning. Also the way that the black costume that was really en vogue at that time. It was very difficult to dye dark colors, and it was real fashion and also an outing of status. And what another feature that I really like is the aprons, the folds in the aprons. That was really a fashion item. That was really something that was done for quite some time. And the eminent portrait historian, art historian, Rudy Eckert wrote a wonderful article about that in Dutch, unfortunately. But if you can read Dutch, please do, because it's just simply delightful. And there is another artist that I would like to bring forward, and that is a female artist. That is Cornelia Toebekop from Kampen. Kampen is a town in the center of the Netherlands and still very religious. And the interesting thing is that she painted this wonderful portrait that is now in the Rijksmuseum, but she also, her mother and one of her sisters were painters, which is rather unusual as there were not many. As said, Amsterdam had the most portraitists at the outset of the century. One of them was Cornelis van der Voort, who came from Antwerp, was very prolific. His refined work is absolutely beautiful example of the sober, stately style that characterized Dutch portraiture in the first decades of the 17th century. See, for example, here, the portrait on the left of Cornelis Bikker van Swieten, inscribed and dated 1618, oil on canvas, and unfortunately, it's not known where it is now, so I only have an image in black and white. On the right, a portrait of Maria van Overijn van Schoterbos, who is now in the Rijksmuseum. Let's see. Let's go to the next one. And again, Cornelis van der Voort. He also did group portraits. And this is a wonderful group portrait of a family with a boy. You can see it's a boy because he has the coral necklace in a way that would be especially for boys. Boys were dressed as girls up till about the age of 7 at that time. And again, you see the apron, which is very nice, I think. Another person, and I will go to that, is, oh, wait, I forget something. After the death of after the death of Van der Voort in 1624, the portrait market there in Amsterdam was taken over mainly by Bernard van der Valkert, Nicolaes Picornoy, and Thomas de Keyser, and they had, especially the last two, had long successful careers. But also in other cities were painters that painted portraits or specialized in portraiture specifically. In Haarlem, for example, around 1610, the wonderful painter Frans Hals emerged, who is still considered one of the top portraitists of his time. And another major exhibition is currently prepared by the Rijksmuseum and the National Gallery. The portrait of probably Isaac Massa and Beatrix van der Laan shows an innovative and informal portrait. Look how they are sitting, very relaxed, her hand on his shoulder, she's smiling. They feel like they are equals, they are enjoying life. And they're in this outdoor scene is absolutely magnificent. And Hals was not only very good in these sort of portraits and individual portraits, but of course he has been renowned for his militia portraits. And there are many of them. And go to the Frans Hals Museum, go to exhibitions that you see, because it's on Hals, just like the wonderful exhibition that was held on male portraits a few years ago. And you see here how informal, how dynamic these portraits have been made by Frans Hals. And other cities who became important centers for portraiture in the 17th centuries were, for example, Delft, Dordrecht, The Hague, Leeuwarden, Middelburg, and Utrecht. And one of the most forward and most successful painters in, sorry, I just have, je kan beter even boven gaan zitten.
Nee, het is stil, het is stil.
Oh, okay. Sorry hiervoor. Sorry. Michiel van Mierisveld started around 1585 in Delft and built up a large studio. And now I did something wrong. But and he painted wonderful portraits but most of them are rather sort of static, mostly half-length portraits or three-quarter-length portraits. You see two here, there. One of, on the left one is also a studio portrait. He had a large studio. There was a wonderful exhibition on his studio practice in 2011 in the Prinsenhof in Delft. If you still can find the catalog, have a look, because it's really fantastic. And while browsing, actually, for my research on this talk, I came across this wonderful blow up that you could do of a portrait in Lyon. And I think it's wonderful nowadays that you can see portraits that you cannot see in real life in such close-up pictures. So you can really study them and you can study the technique. So for me, that's also something that I greatly enjoy. And yeah, also for this talk. I also show some late works by Mierveld. You see that in his last works, his style becomes a little bit more loose, and therefore it's it might be a little bit more lively, but on the whole, he was very steady and stayed in the same style all his life. He had a wonderful career. He had huge amount of how do you say that, patronage from the court, from people like Jacob Cats and Constantin Huygens. But there were other portraitists in Delft as well, such as Van Vliet, Cornelis Hendrik van Vliet. Let's see, for example, here you see the wonderful, beautiful group portrait, family group portrait. Look at all the costumes that you can see here. There was so much attention for details, and you see that there were really a vast array of portraitists at that time who were so talented and could do so many things. Look at these small details of the still life details, for example. This was a musical family, by the way. In Dordrecht, you had, for example, Jacob Gerritson Cuyp. Cuyp has also been very popular in Britain, and also his son Albert Cuyp, who was more specialized in landscape. But his father was specialized in portraiture, although he also did other genres. He was very versatile. You see two very nice portraits. On the left, one of the most endearing portraits to me of a young boy with his falcon and his dog. Let's see, and more boys. I came later on. I found out that I had several boys with golf clubs, and that was a sport that was very popular at that time. But the interesting things on the left, you see a portrait of a child, of a boy, by Jan Antoniusson van Ravenstein, who worked in The Hague, and who was a direct competitor of Mierveld. And he had also a very wealthy clientele and produced many portraits, many children's portraits. He was more daring in his way, maybe sometimes a little less stable in quality, but I think he's simply marvelous. And I really became very endeared to his painting when I saw them again. Have a look at the detail, how this black and white patterns of the costume, and even on the head of the boy, the stick, and even the dog really come so well together. On the right, Wybrand de Geest. Wybrand de Geest was stationed in Leeuwarden. He went briefly for 4 years to Rome and became part of a group that is called the Bandvleugels. There's a wonderful exhibition right now in the Centraal Museum in Utrecht. If you have time, go and have a look of painters who worked in Rome at that time, Dutch painters. They were the Bandvleugels, and he was called, they all had nicknames, he was called the Frisian Eagle. He went back to Friesland and became the most important portraitist of the 17th century in Friesland. And have a look at this costume. Oh my God. I think it's simply fantastic. The graphic patterns on these costumes are so striking, and they add up so much and give so much more character to these portraits. De Geest not only painted children's portraits, of course, but also was involved in a lot of assignments for the court. For example, you see here a portrait of Ernst Casimir and another of Henry Casimir. He also did a lot of officers' portraits in general, and currently there is a research and possibly a publication in preparation. I will go further because these kind of portraits he also did of the wealthy nobility. And these two are portraits of Wietse van Cammingha and Sophia de Vervoel. The one of Wietse van Cammingha is dated 1632. It's full length, also with the tile floors, which we also saw already a decade ago with Cornelis van der Voort. But you see them here very splendidly. You see the wealth, the striking clothes, the jewelry, everything is showing off wealth and good position. And interestingly, De Geest was related through his wife, who was a great niece of Saskia, the wife of Saskia van Uylenburg, the wife of Rembrandt. And they met, I think, when he married Saskia in 1634, and also in 34 he made these wonderful portraits with tile floors, full length, in Amsterdam of Maarten Solmans and Opium Coppit. And one could think that he might have been inspired, but as said, people like Cornelis van der Voort also were using tile floors and full-length portraits. So that is, but still, I mean, these are marvelous as well. Somebody else who actually was briefly a student of both Rembrandt and worked also with Wybrand de Geest is Jan Janszoon de Stomme, the deaf-mute painter, who was born in Friesland, in Franeker, and later on began to work in Groningen. You see here the three children of the Tjarda van Starkenborg family. It's a little bit more naive, but I think he's really very recognizable and very endearing. I have a special feel for him. So I really wanted to include these portraits. Then I go to Utrecht. In Utrecht, the main portraitist at that time, one of the main portraitists at that time was Paulus Moreelse. And his portraits, have a look and see also again in black, but you see the details in the black. It was woven in, these patterns that were woven in. It's absolutely so delicately painted in such high quality. And he also did this portrait, which is a portrait historier, Sophia Hedwig van Brunswijk-Wolfenbüttel, who as Caritas with her three sons, which is a bit unusual, but on the other hand, I mean, also something that happened at that time. And it's fabulously painted. Have a look. If you can see it in real, for real, go and do, because you can do that at the recently reopened Palace Hedlow. Also worthwhile visiting or itself, because this is a real top painting. In Zeeland, You also had several portrait painters at that time, especially in Middelburg. In the beginning of the century, you had people like Daniel van den Queeborn and later Salomon Mesdag, among others. But later in the century, you had Michiel van Limburg and Hendrik Bergman. And I included two portraits of each of these painters. On the left, the self-portraits of van Limburg. And it's so wonderful to see that you have this sculpted sculpted frame around it, really painted, which is extremely unusual. And look at this earnest gaze of this man. And on the right, just a delightful picture with all these braids and things. No, not braids. Sorry. But all these wonderful decorations and beautiful costumes, a see-through to the back. I first saw this at TEFAF, this painting, and I think it's still a stunner. Yeah, you have sometimes very quirky painters, and one of them is Huig Pieterszoon Voskuil. I once wrote an article on a group portrait by him, and I think that his self-portrait is one of the most wonderful paintings that I've ever seen. It's very striking. You can see it in The Hague. I think it's still on view in Galerie Willem V, which belongs to the Mauritshuis. And it's absolutely striking. I cannot say anything else. And it's so straight on. It's so really getting you into it. It's finely painting. You really get a hint of the material of his head. And on the right, you see a painting by Peter Dubourdieu. He was quite a quirky painter as well. And his portraits, often the sitters are a little bit off-center. And he lived and worked in in Leiden. And he did not only paint portraits, he was also dealing in art, ran a shop in socks, and did a workshop and had a workshop for cloth dyeing. So he did a lot to earn his money. And then we go back to Amsterdam. As said, Amsterdam became a very strong center for portraits, and Rembrandt, who entered the portrait market early in the 1630s, had much success from the start, not only with his paintings, but also with his fabulous etchings. And he was a master in visualizing the characters of his sitters, including in his self-portraits. In the end, I show a self-portrait of him as well. On the left, a portrait by Johannes Uitenboogaerts, and on the right, fabulous etching. His technique is absolutely fabulous. I always, when I look at it, I see that he tries to keep a liveliness even in the darkest parts of it. You see that there's a lot of etching, but still there is light in darkness, which is absolutely fantastic. Somebody else also working in Amsterdam, it was Dirk Zandvoort. He also portrayed a lot of children, but here you see a rather static way of presenting. But on the other hand, it's really like, come on, we are on stage and see us. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. Again, also on full length with tiles. This is a rather odd portrait. It was Ferdinand Bol. Ferdinand Bol was just like Govert Flinck, a pupil of Rembrandt. Ferdinand Bol also specifically portrayed a lot of portraits, but also history paintings. This portrait is a little odd, I said, also because it contains an element of another painter. I believe it was the middle person, but still it's quite striking, and it's good to see women at the table, don't you think? Here you have militia portraits again. This is a rather stranger one because it's an upright position. Often you see the oblong position, but I think he did a good job, really building up the whole composition from up all the way down. Yeah, you had more painters, a lot of painters actually in Amsterdam, and I cannot show pictures of all of them. Such people like Pieter Kodde, Jacob Bakker, and yeah, and as said already, Govert Flink, and somebody else who came very prolific in Amsterdam a little bit later than the others is Bartholomeus van der Helst. And I show here one from the 1650s. And it's at oh god, the Wallace collection. And it's one of their top paintings, I think. And can you imagine that she's holding a whole hair in her hands like this, really showing off. And then the wonderful lady, the little girl, with the still life of Peaches. It's simply an amazing picture and of an amazing painter in such a refined way of painting. And have a look at this. This is not this is one of my most favorite civic art paintings of all time, besides the ones by Hals and also the ones by the Night Watch. Although I must say that this is something really special. Have a look at all the details, the buildup of such a really big composition, which is really hard, of all the persons. Sometimes on the left it's maybe a little static, but you see they are engaged with each other. They're looking part at the viewer. You see the nearly bare knees. You see these red knees of these persons. You see several other elements to enliven the composition. The big flag. I think it's just simply amazing. It's very big, and when you stand in front of it, it's absolutely amazing. It's nearly out of this world to me. And then I will go to a portraitist who worked. Oops, I do it again. Sorry. I introduced a portraitist that actually worked a lot of his time in London. He was born in London, but later on came via Middelburg to Amsterdam and Utrecht. And both in Amsterdam and Utrecht, he stayed for a long time, especially in Utrecht. Johnson van Keulen portrayed Jasper Schade. But the interesting thing is that about a decade earlier, another painter painted the same person, Frans Hals, and have a look at the difference of these two painters, how they depicted this person. Of course, 10 years have passed, but still you see that there is so much difference in the way that the character is depicted. And there you see the impact that a painter has on the depiction of a sitter in many respects. And you see other paintings, they are still from the time that he worked in London. And another portraitist who has ties with England as well, but mainly worked in Amsterdam, is Isaac Lutteghuis. And you see that he has a nearly pastel kind of way of depicting his sitters. It is not very, there were no mother of pearl kind of feel in this. And I think he's very distinct and very interesting. At one point, Van Mierenveld had was less popular. And who took over was Gerard van Honthorst. He got a vast array of patronage from the court. And you see several portraits here, two portraits on the left, portrait of Stadtholder William II, Prince of Orange, and on the right, Amalia van Sons on her own. And I think there really are impressive portraits, very stylish, maybe a little less on the character, which is a little sad for me because I really like these endearing, quirky characters who be staring at you. Another painter who also became very popular and brought via him and Adriaan Hanneman, they brought influence from Van Dyck to the Netherlands. Let's see, and I have to get a little bit on with my text. The later portraits by Mijtens and also by Hanneman are painted in a wonderful flowing way with much detail for the fabric, and have this real flair that came into vogue in the later years. Then I go to another painter of my heart, which is David Bailly. I just worked with my partner Fred Meyer on an article for the catalog accompanying an exhibition which is right on now in Leiden to be viewed. So go and have a look at it, because it's an amazing exhibition of an amazing painter that is not very much known, David Bailly. You see a self-portrait on the left and his wife on the right. A little later, you see sort of the same portrait on the left, and you see another one on the right. There has been a lot of debate on whether this could be the same woman and whether they could have been pendants. We propose that they are, but we do not know it for sure. But one of his paintings, these two paintings are depicted. And when you see the whole picture, you see a very interesting painting, which has puzzled art historians for many decades. There is a dispute whether the man on the left is the painter himself, just like the one he is holding. We think not. We think, Fred and I think that only the man in, he is holding in the middle is David Bailly, and that on the left, it may well be a contemporary at that time. From around 1650, and we have proposed Abraham van den Tempel as a possibility. Abraham van den Tempel was a painter who came from Friesland and settled first in Amsterdam and then in Leiden. He was a laken handler. I don't know exactly, it's just in cloth handler, but he specialized at a certain moment in portraits, and he did that on such a high level of quality. Look here at this wonderful composition of a family portrait, which is now in the Rijksmuseum. And here another group portrait of a painter who normally specialized in genre portraits. Have a look. He portrayed himself with his ancestors as portraits on the back, with children, with a lot of people. I think this is a real special portrait, so well painted and so endearing as well. Look at the small portraits here and on the back, really special. And on the left, his later wife, Judith Leister, who painted a marvelous self-portrait. She was mainly specialized in genre portraits, but this portrait, of course, is a stunner and very well known, and one again of the few female painters in the 17th century. Certainly in portraiture there were not many. I mean, one of the most important painters, female painters in the Netherlands in the 17th century was Rachel Ruys, but she was painting flower still lifes very well, high quality. On the right, Johannes Verspronk, also working in Haarlem, just like Judith Leister and Molenaar, who later went to Amsterdam. Johannes Verspronk and this girl, for example, is a very interesting portraitist, more sedate than his probable master. He probably was a master, a pupil of Hals, and his works are more sedate but very finely painted. One thing is always strange with him. Have a look at his paintings, but it appears that his eyes are a little bit sometimes going to the sides, which is a little odd, but they're, on the whole, they're absolutely fantastic. Salomon de Braai and his sons Jan and Dirk de Braai were also working in Haarlem. And they were extremely good painters. You can see that, for example. An interesting story is that on the right, you see the work of Jan de Braai, of his parents, Salomon de Braai and Anna Westerbaan. And there is a statement that, now I go, because I really forgot my text, so I'm really going all the way further. But he said that in a testimony of the 17th of June, 1664, that he declared that this painting could be copied at any time. And that's very interesting. So, and it's concerning the painting on the right. And then I would like to go to a more regional school, which is the school of painters who were working in Hoorn. I worked on various articles on the painter Abraham Lietz in the past, and at that time these painters group became very dear to me. You see here the eldest of them, and that is Jacob Waben. He was not really a fabulous painter. Also did several other things besides it. Painting portraits, but still these are wonderful. And another one is Jan van Teylingen. Also Jan van Teylingen did other things besides painting portraits. The style is quite conservative, but still very competently done. Then we get my Lietz. I really like Lietz. As said, he was a contemporary of another painter at that time, and that is Jan Albertsson Roodsius. There was a wonderful exhibition on Roodsius, including a catalog, not a catalog resume, a beautiful book on Roodsius, and I really can recommend this artist and this book to you as well. If you see how competently he has painted this beautiful young girl and the still life elements, he was able to do that as well. Interestingly, his son Jacob specialized himself later in still lifes. On the right, you see a portrait of Elisabeth Wiebo, and I think her face is so endearing and so lifelike, and so has so much character that I really wanted to include it and show it to you because I'm really excited about it. The sisters Grietje and Lijsbeth Veen, great portraits and really standing in this Hoorn tradition of portraits. And another portrait, militia portrait, this time by Lietz. And Lietz didn't do so many militia portraits. Actually, it was Roodsius who did many and also was a member of a militia group. But interestingly, one of the sitters in this portrait, who were all actually identified, shows a wonderful similarity with a portrait of whom we did not know who the sitter was. So sometimes you are able to connect, through another portrait, you can identify another. I think that's really wonderful. That makes this research on portraiture so compelling and so interesting. Now let's go to another school, and that's Enkhuizen again. We also talked, I talked earlier on Jan Klaas, you know, the double portrait with the son and the father and the son and the mother and the daughter. From their followers or the successors were, for example, Rembrandt. And you see again a boy with a golf club. Same thing, very popular apparently, but also I think they're just wonderful. On the right, Herman Donker. He was a painter who often puts relatively small figures in a landscape background. So a family portrait like this is very typical for his work. So that's, and then we have in Alkmaar. I did not talk about Alkmaar before, but Alkmaar was a real hub of very interesting artists, not only portraitists, and Cesar van Everdingen, also a very interesting exhibition with a catalog happened several years ago. And I would say go and have a look at his work. You see that he's very capable in a very distinct style to portray sitters. Also, he has the same sort of chalk-like feel in the rendering of the flesh and the whole atmosphere of the painting in a way a little bit similar to Lutterhuis in my view. And then we go back to women a bit. And here are, for example, because in Flanders, for example, you had Michaeline Woutier and Johanna Vergouwen in a lesser extent. Then Johanna, only little work is known. But in the Netherlands, not so many were there. But the legendary Anna Maria van Schuurman, who was living in Franeker for some time, produced some portraits, also some carved in wood. Museum Martena in Franeker has a fine room dedicated to Anna Maria, including some of her artworks and writing utensils. And of the half-sister of Gerard ter Borch, Gesine ter Borch, still a wonderful portrait album is known, illustrated by herself, and she painted a memorial portrait of her brother Moses in collaboration with her half-brother Gerard. This book and especially a special display currently is made at the moment at the Rijksmuseum, and I can recommend that as well in case you are in Amsterdam. You see here the memorial portrait that was done for her brother Moses, who died very tragically when he was very young. Moses himself was a very promising painter, and it's a sad loss that he died so young. On the right, you see a portrait by Gerard ter Borch that is currently in the Rijksmuseum. And then we go to the last decade of the late years. And in 1672, it is called the Rampjaar, the disaster year. It marks the start of the late period. In May 1672, following the outbreak of the Franco-Dutch War, the Dutch Republic was invaded and nearly captured by France, supported by Munster and Cologne. In 1673, the situation stabilized, and finally, in 1678 and 79, treaties of peace of Nijmegen were signed. In the 1670s, several painters came to fruition anyway. Some left and went to the south, to Antwerp. But people like Karel Dujardin, who mainly painted landscapes, and the Lille-born Wallerand Vaillant, who came to Amsterdam in 1643, were painting. Here you see the painting by Karel Dujardin, and I think it's very lively. And it's also funny how these white, how do you say that, colors are so lively depicted, and the whole situation is a very impressive portrait. And you see here on the right, Wallerand Vaillant, a painting of Maria van Oosterwijk. Maria van Oosterwijk was also a very competent, wonderful, talented flower painter. And Vajant himself is a very good painter as well. And there will be an exhibition in a few years as well. On the left, Michiel van Musser, one of my most favorite painters. Here you see a painting of a very straight in the eye looking woman with a very funny child in a way. One of the reasons that I'm really very fond of Van Musser is that he just like many, had some sad stories. His first wife died, child died, but then he found new love, and he remarried Elsje Klanis. They got a son together, and on the left you see his son from the on here you see his son Michiel. No, it's the other son. Sorry. On the left here is standing on the right, and on the left you see it's a study for the portrait on the right. It's a real, it feels like paradise. He found paradise in the last years of the 1690s. And you feel that he is so happy. And this is really sort of rising again. Sadly, Elsje, his second wife, died a few years later, or maybe it was done posthumously as a sort of tribute to her, because it's not dated. But you see that it's only a brief moment of happiness, just a few years. And that makes it so endearing to me. And what is also interesting is that the picture on the left was unknown. It was discovered by Fred Meyer, and when it came up for auction several years ago, and later on the eminent art historian Bob Gerhardt wrote about it, because that was his specialty. Michiel van Musser, he died some time ago, and I think he did wonderful work on Van Musser. Adriaan Bakker, another painter, and it's interesting to see that everything is unequal in this. It's very well painted, but the men are more. The women have even smaller chairs. They get less space. They don't have a table. They do not have a book. Apparently, they did not need that. Well, of course they did, but I think it's an interesting portraits also in the standards of today. And then we go to one of my last painters of today, and I'm very happy that you're still holding out. I see I'm way over my time, and that is Nicolaes Maes. Nicolaes Maes came from Dordrecht and then went to Amsterdam. On the right, there is a portrait in the collection of the Hunterian that was still painted in Dordrecht in 1671. In 1673, he went to Amsterdam and became a real en vogue, very important portrait painter. He was he was a pupil of Rembrandt and painted in a very different way in the beginning, but he became very elegant, swirling, very lively compositions. For example, here on the left you see the portrait of a lady as Diana, again a portrait historié. And well, he really made it, and he produced so many portraits, so many. I can't remember. I knew it. I mean, it was hundreds and hundreds, and they all have his distinct personal signature, which is quite an achievement. And somebody else I would like to mention is, because I recently did research on her, is Cornelia de Rijk. She is portrayed here by her first husband, Gerrit van Goor. Gerrit van Goor is really a very little known artist. And Cornelia de Rijk only recently got a little bit of attention and will get a little bit more of attention once my article is out. But you see her here, and she was painting fowl and insects. She did that very well. Jan de Baan, somebody who worked in the late years and took over in The Hague. And you see him here with his wife and their deceased daughter. And also, again, a very endearing portrait, which I like a lot, and which is on view in Museum Bredius. Museum Bredius is a real gem, and not everybody knows it. But if you are if you are in The Hague and you go to the Maurits house, please also go to Museum Bredius. Abraham Bredius was one of the most wonderful, knowledgeable connoisseurs of the last century, and his house is just a delight to visit, including all the paintings. And on the right, we have Portraiture, who became very prolific also in The Hague. He was a pupil of Gerard ter Borch, but he developed his own style. And on the left, Nicolaes Wieringa, who was in the later years working in Friesland in a very good style. On the right, I show you Adriaan van der Werf, one of the most refined painters of the last period of the 17th century and early 18th century. And if you see the detail, the beauty, the attention for all these finely painted details, the way he renders the fabrics, it's absolutely amazing. Somebody else who came also in that, who also worked in the same sort of style, was Godefried Schalke, who worked in part in Dordrecht. So yeah, from the 18th century on, Dutch painting, including countless portraits, were collected in many countries in Europe and beyond, and their impact on art can still be felt up to today. And you see that sometimes I got carried away a bit on everything I was telling, was thinking, and the things that I see and I have seen and revisited. But I am extremely excited by all these wonderful painters who have left their legacy to us, and therefore we can still enjoy it nowadays. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Carla. It is so wonderful just to see such an extensive array of works from across all these different art galleries. If anyone does have any questions for Carla, you are welcome to pop them in the chat, or you can, take yourself off mute and ask a question out loud, or raise your hand on camera. I think, Carla, we do have a few questions in the chat here. Is that all right if I just read them out, Carla?
Yes, I think that's better because I can't see them because I have my text.
Your screen up, yeah, of course. Please do keep your screen up, Carla, just in case anyone has a question about a specific painting, because it means you'll be able to go back to it.
Yes, of course, with great pleasure.
We've got a question here from Roger. Are the monochrome portraits, e.g. the self-portrait of David Bailey, were they actually painted in monochrome? Were they painted in black and white?
No. Unfortunately, I had to put them in because these paintings, we really tried to get them, to find them. The team who were, the main curators of this exhibition are Janneke van Asperen and Christian Vogelaar, and we all tried to find these paintings, but they seem to be lost. Maybe somebody will find them. No, they're absolutely in color, just like the one that I showed in the beginning of Van der Voort. Also, that painting is I can't find it, so nobody can find it at the moment. But maybe it will show up. So that's why I included some black and whites. Normally I don't do, but in this case, I thought they were so important for my story that I did.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks, Roger, and thanks, Carla. And we've got a comment here as well, Carla, from Lola. So Lola's kind of commented on the fact there were so many women painters. Oh, Carla, I'm going to be absolutely terrible with these pronunciations. I don't even want to say them out loud. But Lola's asking, I wonder if you could comment a bit on the sitters, the historical and social context kind of in the background of the production of these portraits. So Lola's speaking specifically about, the female artists there. If you could say a wee bit more about that.
About the female artists in general at that time. Then I will, I make a cameo. I will tell something about Rachel Ruys. Rachel Ruys, as said, was a painter of flower still lifes in particular. She was one of the daughters of Frederik Ruys. Frederik Ruys was an important doctor situated in Amsterdam, and he also sold his whole collection of species of medical species to the Tsar of Russia, Peter the Great. So that's interesting starting point. Rachel was married to Paul, also a painter, and Julian Paul. And but although, I mean, they got a huge amount of children as well, and she was painting so much, and she was able to gain the patronage of a very important international patrons, and she was so famous at her time. And her work is at the top of her time in general. And of course, she and her sister, also a flower painter, Anna Ruys, were able to develop themselves in freedom. And I think that, for example, Julian Paul really kept himself a little bit more in the background, although he was a painter as well. But he must have been so supportive of Rachel. And so she was able really to make it. Although she had somehow have to have all these children, probably because the household was quite wealthy, they were able to have help, which of course has helped, and a strong constitution must have helped as well. But she was an enigma, and she is, for me, one of the people that is an example for me, just as Anna Maria van Schuurman as well, who was able to learn things. But I think maybe, I don't know whether she was stimulated from her parents, in her parents' household, the way, I don't know enough about that. But from Rachel Ruys and Anna Ruys, yes, I know. And it's so interesting. Also, how they were involved, for example, in preparing this species for their father. It's amazing. If you have a possibility to look into it, there is somebody who is writing a monograph on it, Marianne Berardi, on Rachel Ruys. And if you have a possibility, wait for it and then grab it. And there will be an exhibition as well. So have a look at that as well. Does it answer the question, or do you want to know something about the other painters?
No, that was brilliant, Carla. But I am wondering if I've actually misread Lola's question here, because Lola was actually wondering as well about in regards to like colonial expansion. Lola specifically referenced a work by Sulzmann. Am I pronouncing that right? And Coppet.
Who?
Sulzmann. Am I saying that correctly?
Sulzmann.
And Martin Sulzmann, Uchbin Coppet. I'm sorry. I'm doing a terrible job of these pronunciations.
Martin Sulzmann and Oopje Coppet.
Yes.
Yeah, about the sitters themselves.
Well, Lola was wondering about the context of like colonial expansion at that time, and if there's any kind of context there behind their works.
Oopje Coppet and Martin Sulzmann were sitters. They were painted by Rembrandt. And of course, I mean, there were several people who indeed, sadly, earned their living on colonialism and enslaved people working on plantage. Sorry. So, and that's a real sad story. And there were people also went to the colonies and also did portraits there or depicting life in the colonies. It's a little outside my topic right now, so I cannot go too much into it. But for example, Frans Post was somebody who went to the Americas and portrayed the life and the situations, but of course from a different perspective at that time. We address that now, we readdress, and rightly so, this time, and there will be much more said about it. For example, there was a very interesting exhibition at the Rijksmuseum about colonialism and about, which was now about 2 or 3 years ago. So it would be a very interesting source to have a look at that. So yeah, I can really recommend that to have a look at that exhibition. And
thank you. Thanks, Carla, and thanks a lot. And apologies for my absolute terrible
no, I was thinking about an artist, not about the sitter. So
was I. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Does anyone want to put their hand up and ask a question, in person, on camera? I do actually have a question, Carla, not so much specifically about one painting, but just, it was especially in the first few works that you shared, and you kind of, you mentioned how expressive kind of some, like, people's hands were in some of the artworks. I'd written down one of them that really stuck out for me, the 6 Warders of the Drapers Guild.
Yeah.
And actually one by, was it Jon Bry? Did I get that pronunciation right?
Jon Bry.
Jon Bry. So there were just a couple of works there that really stood out for me in terms of the hands. And I was wondering, in these kind of works, is the artist trying to show something through kind of like the expression in the hands, or is it actually kind of showing off like their prowess? Like, is it kind of showing off their artistic prowess? Or
I mean, several of the things are, people use hands all the time, like talking, doing. That happens, and it's a very welcome thing to use, also in portraiture, to enliven the composition and to point at things, to point the attention of the audience to specific sides of a painting. So it's very useful, and it's what we do. And especially, oh my God, and I have to go all the way back.
I know, I'm sorry, I'm realizing the 6 Warders is right at the beginning.
Also to have a look, but you see that it's important for a composition here also. All these hands, they're going from they had a little boy reaching to the fruit, the other the offering of the fruit. It builds up a whole composition together with the fabrics also in the air, the fabrics around it here is all very, it adds up to the composition, makes it more lively, gives it more flow. Let me see, where did I stay? Where I have you here. And here, I mean, the one of the warden is a very in a way, a rather static, although I must say it's not that bad at all. I mean, I think it's an amazing portrait, but you see that all these gestures, and in this case, he holds one of these persons holds something. You see the importance, you see that they are showing some things, maybe related to their trade. So that is the reason that it's used.